Where did they come from? Those were the first stunned words whispered over Tokyo on April 7, 1945. Words carried through static-filled radios as Japanese pilots looked up and saw something they were never supposed to see. Sleek, silver American P-51 Mustangs streaking across the sky at 444 miles per hour, thousands of feet above the capital, their long-range drop tanks still clinging beneath their wings like silent warnings. For months, Japanese pilots had believed the long ocean distance was their shield, their advantage. The Zero had ruled these skies for years. No fighter on Earth, they thought, could escort American bombers all the way from Iwo Jima, 750 miles of open Pacific, let alone arrive with fuel left to fight. And then, the Mustangs appeared. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's greatest aces, later said it felt impossible, like seeing ghosts. The P-51 wasn't just fast, it wasn't just modern. It was the future, arriving early, steel and fire shaped into perfection. The Packard-built Merlin engine roared with power the Zero could never match, and with the new 110-gallon paper drop tanks, the Mustang could cross oceans, escort B-29 seconds to Tokyo, fight, win, and still come home. 96 Mustangs had launched that morning, their wheels lifting off the volcanic ash of Iwo Jima as the sun rose red behind them. For nearly 4 hours they flew over nothing but empty water. No bailout zones, no rescue ships, just ocean and uncertainty. Some pilots clenched rosaries. Others joked quietly to hide the fear. All of them knew one mechanical failure meant disappearing forever. But when the coastline of Japan finally appeared through morning haze, everything changed. Below them, the B-29 seconds continued their steady approach. But now, unlike previous raids, they weren't alone. The Mustang's dove broke formation and the sky erupted. The first Japanese interceptors launched, and seconds later 1-0 spiraled toward the Earth, shredded by 850 caliber guns. Another tried to outturn the Mustang, the maneuver that had beaten so many planes before, but the P-51 didn't need to turn. It climbed, it accelerated. It struck from above with brutal, effortless speed. American pilots later said the dogfights felt surreal, not tense, but inevitable. For the first time over Japan, they weren't surviving. They were dominating. Civilians in Tokyo looked up at the thunder of engines overhead. Not slow, lumbering bombers, but bright, metallic predators, slicing the sky with contrails. The message was unmistakable. Distance could no longer protect Japan. When the Mustangs finally turned back toward Iwo Jima, hours later, fuel gauges trembling near empty, the war had changed forever. Japan's last air defense advantage, the ocean, had vanished. The Americans had bridged the impossible. And somewhere in the mind of every pilot who survived that day, one realization echoed like an approaching storm. The end was coming, and it now had wings shaped like a Mustang. The Pacific War had entered its closing act, and yet the skies over Japan remained deadly, uncertain, and fiercely defended. It was early April 1945. Tokyo still smoldered from firebombing raids, Japanese morale flickered between defiance and despair, and the United States was accelerating toward what it hoped would be the final blow. The island of Iwo Jima, won at a horrific cost just weeks earlier, was now more than a battlefield. It was a forward airstrip carved from volcanic ash, surrounded by empty ocean and haunted by the memory of Marines who died taking it. From that black sand runway, a new kind of mission would be born, one that would push aviation to its edge and shatter Japan's last illusion of safety. The stakes were brutally clear. American B-29 superfortresses flying from the Marianas were reaching Tokyo, but without fighter escort, they were at the mercy of Japan's air defenses. Dozens of crews never returned. Entire formations vanished in smoke and flame. Japan's ace pilots, some of the finest in the world, still believed one truth: no American fighter could travel the distance needed to protect the bombers. That assumption was about to collapse. On the American side were the pilots of the 15th and 21st Fighter Groups, men barely in their 20s now tasked with the longest and most dangerous fighter mission in history. They flew the new P-51D Mustang, powered by the Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, its sleek frame and immense fuel range sharpened further by an innovation few believed would work. Fragile-looking paper drop tanks that carried the extra fuel required for a 1,500-mile round trip. Their commander, men like Colonel Donald Blakesley and Brigadier General Curtis LeMay, controversial, feared, and relentless, believed the only way to end the war was to break Japan's remaining air power at its source, and facing them high above the Japanese mainland were pilots of the Imperial Japanese Navy and Army Air Services, including the legendary Saburo Sakai, one of the most respected surviving aces in Japan. Sakai had fought from the first day of the war to its last and had seen nearly every enemy aircraft the Allies could field, But even he could not imagine what was coming. The people of Tokyo had grown accustomed to bombers, to the distant drone of heavy engines signaling another fire raid, but fighters, a fast, lethal escort capable of chasing Japanese interceptors all the way back to their own runways? No one believed such a feat was possible. For years, geography had been Japan's shield. That morning, on April 7, 1945, the Pacific stopped being protection. What makes this story worth hearing isn't just the technology, though the Mustang remains one of the most extraordinary machines ever built. It isn't only the strategy, or the engineering, or the numbers, it's the human collision of certainty and surprise. The Americans believed this mission could shorten the war, but they knew mechanical failure, weather, or fuel miscalculation could leave them drifting alone over endless ocean. And the Japanese, pilots, soldiers, and civilians alike, believed that no enemy fighter could ever appear above their homeland. When the sky over Tokyo suddenly filled with silver streaks traveling faster than any Zero could hope to match, it wasn't just a tactical defeat, it was a psychological earthquake. It meant the war had reached Japan in a way it never had before. It meant time was running out. From the roar of the first Mustang engines lifting off Iwo Jima's ash to the disbelief in the cockpits of Japanese interceptors, from the B-29 crews who finally felt protected to the stunned citizens below, this moment changed the balance of the Pacific forever. This wasn't just an air mission. It was a turning point, one that signaled the beginning of the end. This is the story of the day Japanese pilots looked up and realized the war had already found them. In the months leading up to April 1945, the Pacific War had transformed from a contest of territory and tactics into a desperate struggle for survival. One side fighting to end the conflict, the other clinging to the hope of stalling the inevitable. The United States had captured island after island at unimaginable cost, and now the final approach to Japan itself had begun. The Mariana Islands, Tinian, Saipan, and Guam, had become home to the massive B-29 superfortress fleet that now thundered toward Japan almost nightly. Those bombers carried fire, destruction, and the weight of an industrial giant determined to finish the war without invading the Japanese home islands. But despite their power, the B-29s flew alone. Their range was immense, stretching across thousands of miles of open ocean, but no American fighter could escort them, not yet. The result was deadly. Japanese radar spotted them early, anti-aircraft guns waited in the dark, and the surviving Zero and Ki-84 Hayate pilots, some inexperienced, some hardened aces, still believed in one advantage: the American bombers were vulnerable. Skies became an arena where dozens of B-29 seconds were torn from formation, engines aflame, crews forced to bail out into hostile waters. Meanwhile, on the ground, Japan faced starvation, shortages, and relentless bombings, yet its military retained an unbroken conviction: Japan would never surrender. The Emperor's forces still believed in the power of the kamikaze, in the loyalty of its defenders, and in the belief that if America was forced to invade, the cost would be too high to bear. Into this tense and brutal atmosphere stepped a new American unit, the fighter pilots assigned to Iwo Jima. They were young, confident, and trained in the latest tactics of aerial warfare. The 15th, 21st, and later the 506th Fighter Groups were chosen not because they were expendable, but because they were the best the United States Army Air Forces could produce. Men who understood that technology alone didn't win battles, skill, discipline, and resolve did. Their aircraft was unlike anything the Japanese had seen in these skies, the P-51 Mustang. Sleek, powerful, and unthinkably fast, the Mustang was Europe's silent king, escorting B-17 seconds and B-24 seconds deep into German territory and returning home victorious. But in the Pacific, its greatest strength had yet to be tested: range. Engineers at North American Aviation and the U.S. Army Air Forces developed lightweight, disposable drop tanks, some made of metal, others of laminated paper soaked in resin, that could stretch the Mustang's flight time by hours. To many, they looked flimsy. To pilots, they looked like salvation. But reaching Japan meant something more than fuel and horsepower. It meant taking Iwo Jima. That island, just 750 miles from Tokyo, was a volcanic nightmare of ash, tunnels, and Japanese resistance. The Marines who stormed its black beaches paid a price carved into American memory: 6,821 dead and more than 19,000 wounded. When the battle finally ended, the island itself seemed to mourn, its surface still smoking from artillery blasts and burning bunkers. Yet from that desolate place, runways soon rose. Bulldozers flattened ash, Seabees built airfields, and the first P-51 Mustangs arrived before the smell of cordite had fully faded. Pilots trained over the island, learning radio procedures, ocean navigation, fuel discipline, and the terrifying reality that turning back early wasn't an option. Meanwhile, the Japanese high command watched the buildup with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Saburo Sakai, the famed surviving ace, heard rumors. American fighters now stationed closer, new aircraft arriving, strange long tanks fitted beneath wings, but even he doubted they could escort bombers to Tokyo. The Zero's reign over the Pacific skies had faded, but the psychological belief in Japan's natural defensive moat, the ocean, remained unshaken. Civilians continued life under rationing, air raid sirens, and a growing sense of isolation. The war was closing in, yet most believed Japan still had time. That time was almost gone. As March turned to April, fuel depots filled, flight plans circulated, and Mustang pilots began studying maps of terrain they might never see from the ground. The ocean weather reports grew tense, wind shear, storms, unpredictable waves, but still the order approached, long-range escort mission, Tokyo. The morning of April 7th dawned gray and uncertain. Pilots walked toward their silver Mustangs, parachutes slung, oxygen masks hanging, many clutching good luck charms from home. Some were hardened veterans, others had never seen combat. Above them, engines warmed, deep, thunderous, confident. On the other side of the sea, Japanese lookouts watched the calm horizon, unaware that everything was about to change. Because the distance that had protected Japan since the beginning of the war was about to disappear. When the Mustangs finally lifted off from Iwo Jima that morning, the roar of their Packard-Merlin engines rolled across the black volcanic ground like thunder. 96 fighters rising in pairs, climbing into a sky that offered no guarantees. Beneath them, the Pacific stretched endlessly, a flat blue void where one mistake meant death. There were no ships below to rescue downed pilots, no islands to ditch on, only water and silence. For nearly 4 tense hours, the formation droned forward in disciplined lines, watching fuel numbers with almost religious focus, eyes flicking from gauges to the horizon to the ocean below. Radios carried short-clipped voices, check formation, hold altitude, fuel looks good, but no one spoke of fear. Then, like the edge of a painting, Japan's coastline emerged through morning haze. Someone muttered over the radio, not bravado, just awe, there it is. The B-29 seconds they were assigned to protect appeared soon after. Massive silver fortresses lumbering forward, and for the first time in the war, those bombers had company, teeth, speed, and protection. As the formation approached Tokyo, Japanese radar lit up, alarms sounding across bases, and pilots scrambled into their cockpits. Among them was Saburo Sakai, who would later write, "When I saw them, I could hardly believe my eyes. Fighters. American fighters. Over Tokyo?" The first combat came fast. A formation of Zeros dove toward the B-29 seconds, expecting the same vulnerable prey they had seen for months, but the Mustangs pivoted, dropping tanks and unleashing their speed. One P-51, flown by Lieutenant John Benbow, closed the distance so quickly the Japanese pilot never had time to react. 8. 50 caliber Brownings erupted, and the Zero burst into flame, spiraling down in black smoke. Another Japanese fighter tried to turn tight to shake a pursuing Mustang, the maneuver that had defeated countless Allied aircraft earlier in the war, but the P-51 simply climbed, then swooped down with brutal precision, firing a controlled burst that tore through its fuselage. The turning point came when the Japanese realized the impossible truth. The Americans were not low on fuel, not exhausted, not simply escorting. They were hunting. One pilot radioed in disbelief, "These Mustangs, they chase us. They can climb, they can dive, they do not break off." The sky became chaos, contrails twisting like scars across the blue as dogfights scattered in every direction. The Mustangs' radios crackled with adrenaline. "I've got one. He's breaking left. Cover the bombers." Meanwhile, below them, civilians in Tokyo paused mid-step and stared upward, not at slow, distant bombers, but at fast, predatory fighters streaking over their capital at speeds they had never seen. To them, it was not just a battle, it was a message. For Japanese fighter pilots, what should have been familiar territory had become a battlefield they could not control. Many jumped into the fight, with honor and desperation, some even attempting ramming attacks when guns ran dry. But the outcome had already shifted. The Mustangs owned the sky. By the time the bombers released their payloads and wheeled toward home, the Japanese air defense was broken, scattered, or destroyed. The Mustangs made one final sweep to ensure no trailing bomber would be ambushed, a gesture that stunned crews used to flying alone into hell, and then turned south, fuel gauges hovering dangerously near empty. Some pilots whispered prayers. Some simply stared at the ocean, hoping for land to appear before silence replaced engine thunder. One Mustang flyer later summed it up quietly, I wasn't afraid over Tokyo. I was afraid after leaving it. Yet the gamble held. One by one, battered, low on fuel but victorious, the P-51 seconds and B-29 seconds descended toward Iwo Jima. The mission had accomplished far more than protection. Japan had witnessed something irreversible. The enemy could now reach them anywhere. The sky, once their shield, now belonged to the Mustang. When the last Mustang touched down on Iwo Jima and its engine finally went silent, the pilots, exhausted, dehydrated, some trembling from adrenaline or near fuel starvation, knew something monumental had just happened. Ground crews swarmed the aircraft, running hands along bullet holes, dented panels, burned paint, and missing drop tanks, but the damage didn't matter. What mattered was the message. The Americans had proven they could escort bombers to Japan and back, and that changed everything. For the bomber crews, the psychological shift was immediate. Missions that once felt like suicide now felt survivable. We weren't alone anymore, one B-29 navigator later said. The Mustangs had given them a shield, a guardian in the sky, and that meant more B-29s reached targets, and more crews lived to fly again. But for Japan, the emotional aftermath was heavier, almost suffocating. Pilots who returned from the battle spoke in disbelief, officers stared at flight reports filled with numbers that didn't make sense, and commanders realized their last strategic advantage, the Pacific Barrier, had vanished. Saburo Sakai, reflecting years later, said the appearance of the Mustang over Tokyo was the moment he knew Japan had lost the air war for good. It felt, he wrote, as if the future had fallen from the sky. Civilians, too, understood the shift. The sight of fast foreign fighters overhead made one truth undeniable. If the Americans could escort fighters to the capital, they could come anywhere, anytime. Air raid shelters began filling even before alarms sounded. Rumors spread, some terrified, some resigned, that the war was nearing its final collapse. Strategically, the consequences were immediate and measurable. After April 7th, the operation wasn't a one-time spectacle. It became routine. Week after week, the P-51 seconds escorted the B-29 seconds. Japanese interceptors dwindled, some destroyed in combat, others grounded from fuel shortages, and many flown by inexperienced cadets replacing fallen veterans. With air superiority collapsing, Japan's ability to defend its skies eroded rapidly. Soon, industrial centers burned, shipping routes vanished, and factories that supported what remained of Japan's war machine could no longer function. And as Japan's air defenses died, another devastating chapter approached. The firebombing campaigns intensified, and eventually, the atomic bomb would follow. For the Mustang pilots, however, the war didn't suddenly become easy. The long missions continued to test their endurance. Some never returned, lost to flak, mechanical failure, weather, or the unforgiving ocean. Their empty bunks reminded everyone that even victory came with a cost. Yet despite losses, morale soared. The men who flew the P-51 seconds felt, not arrogantly but quietly, that they had made history. One pilot wrote in his journal, "Before today we chased the war. After today the war runs from us." When news of the first escort mission spread through the Pacific, it became a symbol, not just of technology or strategy, but of inevitability. It was proof that American engineering, industry, and persistence could overcome geography, weather, and fear. It was proof that Japan could no longer hide behind distance. And in a larger sense, it marked the moment where the skies, the domain that Japan had once dominated, shifted decisively to American control. In the months that followed, surrender became less a question of if and more a question of when. And years later, when aging Mustang pilots and surviving Japanese aces met, some as veterans, some as friends, they agreed on one thing: the day the Mustangs appeared over Tokyo was not just another combat mission. It was the day the Empire of Japan lost the sky. In the end, the story of the Mustangs over Tokyo isn't just about technology or tactics. It's about the courage to attempt something that everyone else believed was impossible, and the willingness of ordinary young men to risk everything for the chance to change the course of history. The mission demanded bravery from pilots who flew across an ocean with no safety net, trust from bomber crews who placed their survival in the hands of those silver guardians, leadership from commanders who believed in innovation when others doubted it, and sacrifice from those who never returned from the sky they helped win. The P-51 Mustang became more than a machine. It became a symbol of resolve, proof that determination and imagination can overcome fear, distance, and even the most entrenched enemy beliefs. But there's a deeper truth beneath the roar of engines and the smoke of dogfights. Wars are not won only with power, but with the willingness to endure, adapt, and push beyond what seems possible. The men who flew that day left behind a legacy not of destruction, but of transformation, showing that history is shaped not by those who accept limits, but by those who defy them. So ask yourself, when the moment comes, when doubt surrounds you and failure seems certain, will you retreat into what's safe, or will you take flight into the unknown and prove what you're truly capable of? When the smoke cleared and the Mustangs returned home, the world had changed. The Pacific was no longer a barrier, Japan was no longer untouchable, and the outcome of the war was no longer in doubt. That single mission marked the moment the balance of power shifted permanently in the air. B-29 crews gained protection, Japanese defenses fractured, and the long, brutal road to surrender accelerated. The Mustang had proven it could go farther, fly faster, and fight harder than anyone expected, and the mission over Tokyo became the turning point that signaled the Empire's final descent. Those pilots didn't just escort bombers. They shattered a belief, broke a strategic shield, and made the future visible. And so, from the volcanic ash of Iwo Jima to the skies above a nation at war, the result was undeniable. The United States now owned the air, Japan had lost its last advantage, and the Mustang's legacy was sealed forever. Not just as a weapon, but as the aircraft that brought the end closer with every roaring mile.